Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. We are back to the celebrity estate planning topic, and for today's episode, we're going to dive into what happened following the death of the famous actor, the Tony Soprano actor, James Gandolfini. He was definitely best known for his time on The Sopranos, right? But he was also in a number of movies and shows and other things that we'll get into in a few. But before I go on, I have to admit something. I'm 35. I think I'm considered like an elder millennial, or I think we're just calling things nowadays for the heck of it. Anyways, I feel like I should be embarrassed by what I'm about to say. I've never seen an episode of The Sopranos. I know, shame. And I'm not really sure if this helps or hurts my cause, but I just never watched a lot of those kinds of shows. Like, I never watched Friends, Sex and the City, or Cheers. I know there's so many more too, but I didn't get into any of them. So I feel better now that I've admitted that I've actually never seen an episode, but nonetheless, here we are. We are going to talk about James's estate, what happened, what we can learn from it, etc. But before that, as always, let's talk a little bit about James personally speaking first. According to his Wikipedia page, hailing from New Jersey, James was born in September of 1961. And a little fun fact, you know those little senior superlative things like who had best hair, best car, most likely to exceed, those things? Well, our guy James was the class flirt. I just thought that was kind of funny. James graduated high school and went on to attend and graduate from Rutgers University in 1983. He also attended an acting school as well. And shortly after, he started getting into some acting, started off with some smaller stuff, of course, and ended up landing some big stuff too. And then came The Sopranos, which was pitched in 1995 and ultimately first released in 1999. And we'll get to The Sopranos here in a second. But I just think it's worth noting that while James is really, really known for The Sopranos, he was also in a lot of movies and shows and voiceovers and just associated with other notable things too. I just did not want to do him a disservice and tie his name and identity to only The Sopranos. So I just wanted to mention that nugget. So on to The Sopranos, David Chase, who was the television writer and producer, pitched his idea for The Sopranos to major networks like Fox and CBS. But finally, HBO picked it up. The show was described by the Wikipedia page, quote, revolved around Tony Soprano, a New Jersey-based Italian-American mobster who tries to balance his family life with his role as a boss of the Soprano crime family, end quote. James Gandolfini was invited to audition for the role or the part of Tony Soprano after the casting director saw his performance in the movie True Romance. And Tony got the part, and the show kicked off in 1999 and went on for 6 seasons, ultimately ending in 2007. And James played Tony Soprano all 6 seasons. The show itself and Tony as the actor won many, many awards, including Emmy Awards, Golden Globes, all those things. And to kind of bring this full circle, David Chase, who is the writer and producer, said after James's death that, quote, without Jim Gandolfini, so he must have called him Jim, without Jim Gandolfini, there is no Sopranos. There is no Tony Soprano, end quote. Personally speaking, James first married a lady by the name of Marcy in March 1999. They had a son named Michael, though they ended up divorcing in December 2002. Sometime later, James met model and actress Deborah Lynn and ended up marrying her in August 2008. And together they had a daughter named Lillian. So Michael had two children. James had two children. Michael from his first marriage and Lillian from his second marriage. While James was traveling with his family in Rome, Italy in June of 2013, they did some sightseeing in some terrible heat. After that, his son Michael walked into their hotel's bathroom to find his dad unconscious on the floor. James ended up dying very shortly thereafter, and according to his autopsy, it was due to a heart attack. And that was on June 19th, 2013, and he was 51 years old. Way too young, right? According to many sources, his estate ended up being kind of around or just north of $70 million. 70, not 17. $70 million. So what kind of estate plan, if any, governed his estate? Well, I can share that he did have an estate plan, but his estate plan only consisted of a last will and testament. Interestingly, because he had a will only, it had to go through a public court process called probate. And since that process is public, I happened to find a copy of his will, and I linked it in the source links for this episode. So since I found it, I just thought this episode would be kind of cool if I just went through it with my own eyeballs and kind of give you the lowdown. So first and foremost, after the very normal protocol of what a will says, pay my debts, pay my expenses, pay my taxes, when you start getting into beneficiaries and things, his will had things called specific bequests, which, as I explained them to my own clients, they're really super duper specific things in nature that occur off the top before money and assets are distributed. Oftentimes they are things like personal property. So think jewelry, tools, guns, those sort of things. So he had a specific request for his clothing and jewelry, and that was supposed to be distributed to his son Michael. Everything else, personal property-wise, besides his clothing and jewelry, went to his wife, Deborah. He also had some other specific bequests that were cash, that were specific gifts as well that occurred off the top. And those include the following. He was very generous. So $200,000 to his assistant, Paulette. I guess she informally went by, or maybe she just always went by Trixie. So $200,000 to her, $50,000 to his friend Fatima, $500,000 to his niece Laura, $500,000 to his niece Jenna, $100,000 to his godson Robert, $200,000 to his friend Thomas, and $50,000 to his friend Doug, with an express provision that he wanted Doug to use those funds for Doug's son. Very generous gestures to people clearly near and dear to him, right? And his will had last names, of course, but I didn't want to bore you guys with people that you probably don't know. Furthermore, he had a specific provision, which is in my world called a right of first refusal. And what that is it basically gave his son Michael first dibs to purchase a condo in New York that was his, James. I looked to see if Michael actually took the option and purchased it. But I doubt he did. I didn't get a solid answer, but I doubt he did, because in 2013, when James died, Michael would not have even been 18 yet. So it's very likely that his legal guardian, and I'm going to guess was probably his mother, Marcy, would not have probably seen the benefit in keeping it, since he wasn't 18, and it was just a right to purchase it off the estate. Though I don't know for sure. I couldn't find a solid answer. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I highly doubt it. Another specific bequest was to have his house and land in Italy. that the house and land in Italy is supposed to be held in trust for the benefit of his children, Michael and Lillian. The will said that the properties in Italy could go to the two of them 50-50 once they both turned 25. Well, Michael is like 24 or 25-ish, like right now, but Lillian's only like 9 or 10. So that trust holding the properties is likely still in existence and holding it for their benefit until they turn 25. And the final provision in James's will, it's often called like the residuary distribution, is like where everything else went. Like it says that, like the remaining of the estate after all these specific bequests, what happens then? And his will says that it was supposed to be split like this: 30% to each of his sisters, Joanna and Lita. So 30%, 20% to his wife, Deborah, and 20% to his daughter, Lillian. Now, you may have noticed that he did not include his son, Michael. But in the very next article in his will, it reads like this, quote, "I have in mind my beloved son, Michael, but I am not providing for him other than as set forth in my last will and testament because I have made other provisions for him," end quote. Now, some may think, oh, the shade, he didn't get anything else. But in my professional opinion, that language right there is not James disinheriting Michael from everything else. I think what that means is James had alternative things, like things outside of the will going to Michael. So whether through like beneficiary designations on things like life insurance, retirement accounts, etc. Or maybe he set up a trust outside of the will that, trusts avoid this probate process. So, if someone is getting disinherited, the language is usually fairly harsh, honestly, because it has to be. It has to be to protect the document and the purpose of that disinheritance language. So the language he used in this will about Michael, I really don't think Michael got disinherited, and I really think that probably would have caused a big old fight, but it didn't. So I think the will is him saying Michael is not disinherited. He's getting other things through the will. That's my professional opinion. Kind of on that note, if you look up the estate of James Gandolfini, and when I say that, like if you just like Google, estate of James Gandolfini, there was little to like no arguing involved in his estate, which is really great and refreshing to see and read, because honestly, blended families, whether you believe it or not, are just really ripe for disagreements. But here, no one was fighting with each other. But where the slip up happened, because I always feel like I always find a slip up in these episodes, right? That was actually made by James himself. So truth be told, he should not have just had a last will and testament. If you Google James Gandolfini estate, you won't see articles about family fighting. But what you will see is many, many articles about how James was very generous with many family and friends, but that we haven't talked about the biggest beneficiary of all, of everyone. Do you guys want to guess who I'm talking about? Taxes. I'm talking about Uncle Sam and the IRS. It has been said that due to James only having a last will and testament, he did not leave his estate in a way to avoid estate taxes. And for that reason, his estate had to cough up around $30 million in taxes. Yes, you heard that right. And $30 million of like a $70 million estate. So what is super crazy and sad is that that's totally avoidable with some good estate planning. The thing about it is that there had to have been trusts involved to avoid paying estate taxes. And for whatever reason, James elected to do by far the most basic estate planning document there is out there, a will. Was it better than nothing? For sure. Without it, many of the people he provided for would not have gotten anything. So you think like his assistant, his godson, his sisters, his friends. So he was at least able to accomplish his very specific wishes, like in regards to those people. But without more planning, he let taxes become the biggest beneficiary of them all, which just stinks. And I'm just going to sit here and tell myself and hope that whatever attorney drafted this will explained all the estate planning options, including trust planning. There's no way I would not explain trust planning for someone with that type of net worth. Before we wrap up, this seems like a really awesome time to mention a little shout out in my estate world. So currently the federal estate tax exemption amount is like $12.92 million per person, which what I mean by per person is as a married couple, that means you get over like $25 million. What that specifically means, like in regards to this episode, is if you have an estate worth more than that, you need more planning than a will, okay? Otherwise, you'll be in the exact same seat as our friend James here. And I admit, like a heavy majority of my clients are not anywhere close to those numbers. So for my normal clients, it's a non-issue. But the reason I bring this up is because those numbers are supposed to drop to like the $5 to $6 million per person range in 2025, 2026. So those numbers are going to drop pretty drastically unless they pass further legislation to keep it high like it is right now. So just something to know and watch out for. If your estate is getting up into some millions of dollars, it's definitely something to be thinking of to do more estate planning. Alrighty, we are out of time. I think we're quite clearly ready to wrap this episode up. So next week, we are back to a cautionary tale type of episode. And on those episodes, that's where we talk about real life clients, real life cases that I or my office have worked on. Always good stuff on those episodes. So tune in for that next week, my friends. And until then, take care and be well.